everybody out there. This is Shannon. I am going to do this week's review via podcast since we're talking about podcasts. And I thought while I was doing it that I would tell everybody a little bit about how I am doing this. So through my laptop, which has a built-in microphone, I am using Sound Recorder, which came with my general Windows setup that I have. And then that sound recorder is compiling this audio as MP3. And then I'm going to use podbean.com to store my media file, which I will then upload to my blog. So hopefully this all works out and you're listening to this right now instead of reading my entry for this week. This week we were talking about podcasting and education, which I think is really interesting concept, especially when we looked at the idea of the RSS feed portion of it and kind of getting these automatic updates as as you're sleeping. So it almost gives a professor or a teacher instant access to students and really helps us maybe take advantage of time that we don't have. I think that one thing that is a huge issue facing schools today is time and the time that we have with students versus the time that we can actually be with them. And I think a lot about how if I could podcast to my students for their 30-minute bus ride in the morning, what a huge difference that could make, how much more time they could potentially have with me as a teacher, to be looking at this, or in times when I can't be working individually with a student, all of a sudden now I can, if they have that audio there that could guide them. Um, it almost really adds that idea of when education meets the goal of that lifelong learning piece, the thing that we always talk about. I think that's really important, and I think that the scenario that was present in the article, "There's Something in the Air, Podcasting and Education," really got to that where learning becomes a sense of how you live your life, and the example there really went into that. It also made me think about an article that was in this month's edition of Edutopia about project-based learning and about how project-based learning can really influence students and again make learning part of their life. And I think that's kind of the patterns that we've been seeing in a lot of the different technologies we've looked at. And I think podcasting is just one of those pieces. And I saw a lot of connections to our class as well, in terms of the idea of feeling a deeper sense of connection maybe with your instructor when you have these podcasts to go with. Obviously, like Kevin, we don't see Kevin. We don't have class with Kevin, and in this class, we don't have any live lecture at all. So I think that the podcasts have been helpful in kind of helping me to feel a little bit more connection, understanding, who Kevin is. On the other piece of this that I think is really important is like this idea that it's easy, and hopefully this is easy. This is the first time I've ever done a podcast, so it seems like it's been fairly simple. And I know that a friend of mine, he does every week, he and his brothers do an hour-long phone call with each other where they just talk about things going on in their lives or movies or politics or whatever, and then they put that on their blog and they podcast it. So I'm assuming it's going to be fairly easy. I hope that it's fairly easy. But there's a couple of drawbacks that I see with this too. And one of those is that I actually tried to do this podcast from my office at the Gallup-McKinley County Schools Central Office, and our email server, or not our email server, but our actual server has blocked it. We use a program called WebSense that blocks inappropriate content, and this content was actually blocked. And most of our money for our technology comes from a program called E-Rate, and without that E-Rate money, we really don't have a technology program. So there's not really any way around that. WebSense, blocks things that E-Rate tells us we have to block, and when those things are blocked, it's kind of a non-negotiable most of the time. So it does kind of make me wonder about like what are the ramifications of using this within a K-12 system? Like, is it actually something that we can be doing? That's one piece. The other piece that I'm wondering about is just the idea of, if we're going to do a podcast, you're really assuming that you have a lot of auditory learners, and if you have a lot of auditory learners, It's great, but I think that's probably pretty unusual. So my question is, why not just make this, a YouTube clip that is narrated through this? And especially I think because most people, I think most MP3 players that people have nowadays have video function anyway. Or maybe not, but that's my take on it. Is that most MP3 players today that you would be using for the podcast will have that as well. If you're just going to access it through a computer, it would have that as well. So I think that podcasting is really interesting, and I think that hopefully I'm going to find some ways to integrate it into the design for my project, and and I hope that we can find a way to make that happen. So I'm going to be looking into this a little bit more, and maybe I will throw up another podcast sometime soon. Thanks for listening. Okay, so here is another note. I tried to upload my podcast to Podbean, and it doesn't actually take Windows Media Audio. So I'm actually gonna try to do this through YouTube, and then hopefully throughout the day I'll find a better, like specifically podcasting piece to go with. But let's see if YouTube is going to do the trick for me.